So today I'm going to talk about the reinforcement program that we are running on the Balkans. And I'll just start with a short intro of the magnificent Egyptian vulture. It is actually the smallest vulture species in Europe. It has a very beautiful yellow orange face with curly hair, and this bird is really magnificent. And in everywhere it goes, it attracts people attention because of how it looks, but also because it's very smart and very smart bird, but also because it's a long distance migrant that connects people from Europe with people from the Middle East and from Africa. Unfortunately, the population of this species is in decline in many parts of Europe, actually in many parts of the world. And here on the map, you can see where the species is still thriving, mostly in Spain, in southern France, few locations in Italy and the Balkan Peninsula, and also Turkey holds a significant part of the population, although it is not reflected on that map because it's from the European Bird Breeding Atlas. The Egyptian vulture has a strong cultural significance. Uh, Everywhere it goes, there are some legends, some stories about this bird, and the reason for that is simply because it is very much connected to people, especially to people in the rural areas. Here in the Balkans, it is breeding very close to the farmers. It is the first thing that farmers see when they go outside in the morning with the shepherds, the Egyptian vulture just flying above. Very often in Turkey, for example, they breed on the cliffs just above the sheep pen, simply because they feed on the carcasses of the sheep and other livestock, but also on their dung. So they call it in different names. They call it the white vulture. Somewhere they call it the small vulture. In Turkey, they call it akbaba, which means like the white father. There is an interesting way to call this bird in Albania, for example. They call it the horse of the cuckoo. As you see, there is a big mural on this screen that was created in Albania, and you see how the cuckoo is on the back of the Egyptian vulture. Actually, according to the story, the cuckoo is so lazy that on the way back from Africa, it is traveling on the back of the Egyptian vulture, that it is bringing it back to the Balkans. And these two species are like when they arrive, it means that the spring has arrived to the Balkans, the Egyptian vulture and the cuckoo. Despite that, unfortunately, the fate of the Egyptian vulture is not so good. Historically, it was very widespread in the Balkans, as you see on the map. It was spread all over the Balkans. But after the 60s, the species started to decline due to various reasons, mostly related to wildlife poisoning here on the Balkans and also along the Flyway. And we made a study a few years ago that showed that in the period 1980 to 2012, the species was declining with a very high pace with 7% per year. And it was very likely that the species might go extinct by 240. So the species is already extinct in some of the Balkan countries like Serbia, Croatia, Romania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and is currently breeding in some small clusters, let's say, only in 5 Balkan countries: Bulgaria, Greece, North Macedonia, Albania, and a small remnant population of 1-2 pairs in European part of Turkey. So in total, we have less than 50 pairs left on the peninsula. Therefore, we started large-scale studies and conservation efforts. Since the early 2000s, the first efforts started, but they were intensified after 2010. And actually, Stephanopoulos here, you see that we are citing a paper that we did together, and he did a lot of modeling, a lot of work with scientific work on the species data. And we found out based on that the species most likely will go extinct unless we manage to halt that extinction. And the main two pillars in our conservation strategy in order to achieve that is to reduce the mortality on the breeding grounds and along the flyway, with estimated about 6%, but also to initiate a reinforcement program with the release of captive bred individuals for the next 20 years. Of course, just releasing individuals without increasing survival actually is not going to secure a long-term survival for the species. That is why releasing individuals is a way to halt the decline until we mitigate the threats. Therefore, in 2017, a very large conservation project funded by the LIFE program of the European Union started. It was coordinated by BSPB, but included lots of partners in 13 different countries. You see here some pictures, a picture from Ethiopia, for example. So lots of people were involved and dedicated a lot of their time and expertise to study the threats and to initiate pilot conservation efforts for these species along the entire flyway. So in the Balkans, in Turkey, in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Egypt. Lots of countries were involved in these large projects. And the main threats that we had to face and to fight, of course, were poisoning that mostly occur in the Balkans and also in Ethiopia. Also illegal killing, that is a top priority and top threat for the Middle East. Electrocution and collision that occurs more or less throughout the entire flyway, especially in Turkey, in Ethiopia, also in the Balkans. And a specific threat for the west of Africa, which is the persecution of vultures for belief-based purposes. It mostly occur in the wintering grounds in Niger and Chad, and usually the dead bodies are transferred to Nigeria and sold on the markets there. But today we are going to focus mostly on the reinforcement program. So when we initiated that program, we had a very important question to ask ourselves and to find the answer. And this question was whether we can release any Egyptian vultures that we find in captivity, because there are not so many in captivity and in breeding centers, or we need to stick to birds that originate from the Balkans. They're even less. So for that purpose, we initiated a genetic study. We collected and were provided samples from various parts along the Egyptian vulture range. And the results from that study indicated that there is actually low differentiation among the populations, and there is an absence of genetic structure. So we found out that as far as the population where the birds come from is a migratory population, so from Spain, France, for example, or Caucasus, these birds could be source individuals for the releasing program. And that had a very important implications, because it meant that we can use any birds from the European ex situ breeding program for our restocking efforts. Also, in the very beginning, in 2016, and more intensively after 2018, we had to find out what is the most successful releasing strategy for these species. because there is not much experience of restocking of the Egyptian vulture. There are only two running projects, one in Israel and one in Italy, that were using different approaches, different releasing strategies. So we decided that in the first 3 years of the project, we are going to simply test the three most common methods for releasing birds, raptors, and see which of these methods has the best success in terms of survival of the released birds. Sources of the Egyptian vultures for the release were primarily various zoos and breeding centers in Europe. For example, the Wildlife Rehabilitation and Breeding Center in Bulgaria, Sofia Zoo, Prague Zoo, that is coordinating the captive breeding program, Ostrava Zoo, Schönbrunn in Austria, and others. But also at the latest stages of the reinforcement program, we started extracting Egyptian vulture chicks from wild nests, usually birds that hatch very late in the season. And we found out that they have higher mortality during migration because they fledge very late from the nest and they have very little time to prepare themselves for the long migration. So we decided to extract such chicks from the nests and keep them in captivity until the next spring and release them as a attempt for head starting of these individuals. The first method that we started testing was the hacking. So this method, you can see on the picture above, we built a small cage in a old Egyptian vulture nest on the cliffs in Bulgaria. We were placing Egyptian vulture chicks in that cage when they are like 50 or 60 days old. So they could spend about 2-3 weeks there until they are ready to fledge. And after that, we opened the gate and the chicks could fledge from the nest. The main disadvantage of this method is, of course, that these birds have no parents. So they have no parents to take care of them after fledging, and we had to provide food somewhere nearby until they are ready to find food by themselves. And it turned out that this method was very unsuccessful in terms of survival, and the survival rate was very low. It was about 20%. So after the first 3 years, this method was totally abandoned because most of the birds were dying usually on migration. They were not probably fit enough to survive the long migration route to Africa. The other method that is fostering means that birds coming from captivity at a young age were placed in wild nests where chicks of similar age are already available, and so the foster pair could take care for the chick coming from the breeding center until it is ready to fly. The first part of this method was successful, so all the chicks that we placed in wild nests were accepted by the foster pairs. They were taking care for them. Everything was okay until fledging. However, we could release only 4 birds through this method because it is extremely difficult to find foster pairs. As you can imagine, as I said, we have a small population, so we have to find pairs that have chicks at similar age to those chicks coming from captivity. And it was very demanding and very difficult task to do because in captivity, usually chicks are born a bit later than in the wild. So only 4 birds were released through this method, and the survival was better than the hacking. It was like 50%, similar to the usual survival of wild chicks, but was not sufficient enough. And the last method that turned out to be the most successful is the delayed release method. In this method, we keep the birds for the first 9 months of their life in captivity, either in the zoos or in the breeding centers. For the first winter, they stay there, and then in the next spring, we place them in a big adaptation aviary in the core of the Egyptian vulture population at a feeding station, where they stay for 3 months. And actually, we are now calling that aviary Egyptian Vulture School, because during their stay in the aviary, they have to pass different exams in preparation to be ready to be released in the wild. So in that aviary, it is placed at a feeding station, so the birds could actually see how the wild Egyptian vultures behave, how they interact. They could observe the area and be prepared for the release. Also, the aviary is big enough so that they can train their flight abilities in the aviary. They can fly from one side to the other, and we placed a dead tree so they can learn how to land on trees. And this turned out to be very important, for example, because in the first years we had some birds after the release were sitting on the ground and were attacked at night by foxes or jackals and were killed. But after we inserted this dead tree inside the aviary, they learned how to land on the tree, and actually all of the birds released afterwards were seeking for trees and for high spots, even in the first days after the release. And since then, since 3 years, we have no mortality from predators like foxes and jackals. Uh, so these methods guaranteed a very high survival rate until the end of the first migration. It was nearly 70%. So it was even higher than the survival of the wild chicks. And so far we have released more than 30 individuals. 11 of them had returned to the release sites after spending some years in Africa. And we already have the first individuals that are adult and are part of breeding pairs, which is also a great success. We have 6 individuals that reached adulthood and already established breeding territories in the wider area where they were released. Here you can see the comparison between the 3 different methods and the wild chicks. You see that delayed release has almost 10% higher survival rate during the first migration until the end of the first migration than the wild individuals, for example. The main mortality causes that the released bird suffered were mostly the number one cause was drowning into the sea. So you know that the shortest route between the Balkans and Africa is through the Mediterranean Sea, which is more than 350 kilometers of open seawater. That's a very challenging thing to do. And previous studies showed that birds from the Balkans, especially the juvenile ones, the not experienced birds, some of them are trying to cross the sea simply because they don't know the safest route through Turkey, and many of them are drowning into the sea. And the same happened with the released birds. But it is interesting to note that this graph, this pie, is showing the mortality from all released methods. And we found out that birds released through hacking and fostering suffered the same mortality due to drowning into the sea, but as the wild chicks. But the birds that were released through the delayed release method, actually they had more time to prepare for the migration and to know their flight abilities, their skills. So many of them reached the sea and the shore in Greece or in Turkey, but most of them decided not to try to cross. So they were flying back and forth until they find a way to follow the land to Africa, and the majority of them did not try to cross. Uh, and we have actually from 33 birds that we released, only one died in the sea. Two of them managed to cross it. Actually, they were waiting for suitable winds to cross the sea, and they managed. And all of the others actually managed to find a better route over the land. However, other mortality causes that are usual for the species appeared, like electrocution, poaching, and poisoning. Especially poaching and electrocution um, had the highest mortality rates. And here you see the tracks of two birds that were released in 2018. You see how vast areas they travel in the first few years of life. These are Boyana and Pantelei. This is how we call them. And you see they traveled more than 20 countries all over the Balkans, the Middle East, and Africa. But at the end, both of them returned successfully to the release site in Bulgaria. So what is the impact of the releasing program so far on the wild population? As I said, we started the first releases in 2018, and only 4 years after the start of the releases, we already had two individuals that reached adulthood and occupied breeding territories in the Balkans. Usually, Egyptian vultures mature at about 4-5 years of age. We had one individual that was still subadult. It was 3 years old, that occupied breeding territory and found a wild partner. So this was a huge success for this young program, and very promising for the future. Here you can see a timeline of our efforts. So 2018, the first, 2016, the first releases start, and then in 2018, 2021, the efforts were intensified. And already in 2022, we had the first pair in the wild, consisting of one wild and one captive bred individual. Then in 2023, we had three more captive bred vultures that occupied breeding territories in the Eastern Rhodops. And in 2024, we already had breeding success. So the first successful breeding was recorded, two pairs raised in total three chicks in the release area. And these were all very promising results. So we continued with that releasing program, and we abandoned since 2020. We abandoned the other two release methods, and we stick just to the delayed release method. Here there is a nice video. I don't know. I hope you can see of one released and one released bird and its wild partner. So in 2023, we had two more individuals that occupied territories, and until 2024, this number rised to 5, and already this year we have 7 individuals that were previously released and are part of pairs in Bulgaria, close to the release site. And now you can see a graph that is showing some positive news for the Egyptian vulture population on the Balkans. Due to this reinforcement program, and especially to the conservation program mitigating the threats on the Balkans and along the flyway, we finally could see that the population on the Balkans is stabilizing. You see that since 2006, it was in a very sharp decline until about 2018. And after 2018, the population stabilized about 50 breeding pairs on the Balkans. So this is a huge success for all the people that worked hard along the entire flyway. However, we are not done yet because what we want to see is to reverse the negative trend and to see a positive trend, to see an increase of the population again. And that is what we are working on. And actually, on this slide, you see that in Bulgaria, where the releasing is going on, for the first time in the last 2, 3 years, we see a positive trend. So the population was going down until 2019, when it was the lowest number to 24 pairs only. And last year and this year, we have 35 and 36 breeding pairs in Bulgaria, and especially the population increased in the area where we are releasing captive bred individuals and chicks taken from the wild and had started. So we hope that this trend is going to continue and the population is going to keep growing. But at the same time, we continue to work to mitigate the threats and increase the overall survival of the wild individuals and the released individuals, so that in a few years' time, we hope that restocking program will not be needed anymore because the population will be growing by itself. And here I want to show and to tell you three interesting cases of released birds. You remember the bird Boyana that was from the video that traveled in over 20 countries on 3 continents, really birds that connects people from different cultures and different places. She was born in Prague Zoo and released in 2018. So she was the first to occupy a territory in Bulgaria. And unfortunately, in the same year that it occupied a breeding territory, it was shot by poachers. So eventually she died. But this is just a reminder it was just a reminder to us that conservation efforts to mitigate threats must continue. On the positive side, another bird called Easy. She was released in 2020, and only 2 years later, in the summer, she found a partner. But it was very interesting that its partner was a wild bird, but with a GPS transmitter. So we called him Lucky because they were very lucky to meet and to pair. And for the first time, we managed to track with the GPS tags both partners from the pair. So on the map on the screen, you can see how they travel together, the yellow and the red line. They travel together in their breeding territory before hatching the chicks. And last year and this year, this pair managed to raise in total 4 chicks. So they are quite productive, although very young. And last year, we also tagged their 2 chicks in the nest with satellite transmitter. So we managed to track the whole family. And you can see here the tracks of all the birds. Unfortunately, both chicks died during the migration. One of them drowned into the sea, and the other one was shot by poachers in Turkey during the migration. But the adults survived and reached the wintering grounds in Sudan and Chad safely, and this year returned back to the breeding grounds. And the last case is another bird called Pantelei coming from Spain, from Spanish Zoo. He's the oldest survival, so he's born in 2017, and is from the first birds that we released in 2018. You see that he traveled a lot, but what is more interesting is that in 2023, he returned back to the release site, and actually he managed to fight some land from nearby pairs. And you see here on the map, these are the tracks of three neighboring pairs, and the one in the middle is Pantelei. So before this land, this area was part of the pair with the pink color. But Pantelei arrived and he was fighting fiercely with the males from the neighboring pairs, and he managed to bite that land from them. And last year he managed to attract a female to that territory, and this year they started building a nest, but are not yet successful in breeding. But it is a very interesting case to share. What are the future priorities of the reinforcement program? We developed a strategy, a 20 years strategy for the reinforcement, which includes the creation of another release site in Greece and the release site in North Bulgaria. And at the moment, we are working to achieve that goal in a short term. Another priority is to increase the number of birds in captivity, and especially their breeding success, because at the moment it is very low. So very little, very small number of birds are available for releasing programs in Europe, and the competition for that is quite high. And also we are still extracting some juveniles, 1, 2, 3 from the wild nests that meet certain criteria, and that are afterwards had started to increase their chances for survival. And you can find some news, and we publish annual reports for the reinforcement program every year. So on our website, lifenewfront.eu, you may find our annual report and read more about the magnificent Egyptian vulture and the work that we and all the partners along the Flyway are doing. It's very exciting. So thank you very much. I hope you have some questions, and it was an interesting presentation to you.